Hello, this is Kris Nelson for evolveconsciousness.org. Today is going to be a presentation on metaphysics, language, and reality. And this is a basic introductory material for the Trivium. There are about 20 or so images. I've been working on these for the past few months. The images were mostly developed from reading the Trivium book by Sister Miriam Joseph. Apart from that, I guess there is not much to say, so I will just begin with image 1, which is the base of the Trivium and the Quadrivium, the base of the 7 liberal arts. The 7 liberal arts has to do with reality in our mind and matter, the two most fundamental parts that we recognize in reality, our consciousness and existence itself. So the importance of the 7 liberal arts is to get to action, to do something in the world with what we know. Action begins in an agent. We are causal agents and we can create actions, and the action ends in an agent. That means the effects of the action come back as input into other agents in order for us to causally create more output actions, and it reciprocally feeds back. That's how the web of reality of our interaction in our behavior and our actions functions. I have an infographic on that, on natural law causal agents. So on the left there's the Trivium, which represents 3, and the Quadrivium on the right, which represents 4. So the Quadrivium comes after the Trivium, because you need to know how to think first before you study existence and reality more accurately. So the Trivium is the arts of the mind, arts of language. It deals with letter symbols. The Quadrivium is the arts of matter, and of quantity and extension, and it deals with number symbols. So the letter symbols is how we communicate about reality, how we attribute meaning, how we give meaning, appropriate meaning. And we can't really communicate with numbers, those are too basic, but reality is composed of numbers. So it's 2 different ways of looking at it, but we first need to communicate about reality before we can get into the more abstract, perceptual aspects of reality, which is more focused on numbers. And Pythagoras went into that, and many other philosophers. But the most important part is learning how to think, the art of the mind, and that's where logic comes in as the art of thinking. Before logic, you have to input things, and that's where the art of inventing and combining symbols. We invent symbols, arbitrary symbols that we then attribute to specific meanings, which are not arbitrary. Then the symbol is imbued with a meaning, and we can combine symbols to give greater complexity and directedness of our communicability towards others. So if we only use a few symbols, we can't communicate much, but as we combine symbols and create greater complexity, we can communicate more about reality. So logic comes afterwards, and this is the central part of the Trivium, which I've gone into in the other 5-part article series called Language and Reality. It's the art of thinking. Logic is the most important for everything. You have the input and you have the output, and without the processing, all you have is stimulus and response, grammar to rhetoric. Logic is the most important. And then finally, after you figure things out and you process it and you think correctly, then you can finally use the art of communicating, which is rhetoric, in order to output things in a logically coherent, cohesive manner that makes sense when you're trying to represent reality through symbols that we use to communicate. So the Trivium, when you use grammar, logic, rhetoric, the goal is all about thinking, and it produces, and it's the capacities that allow us to read, write, speak, and listen. So just briefly, on the right side, the quadrivium has to do with matter, quantity, extension, number symbols. Arithmetic is basic number, geometry is number in space, music is number in time and space, so it's time and motion, and astronomy is music is number in time, and then astronomy is number in time and space. Music is just the numbers as they move. You have to have time change, and then you can hear the different notes as they're played. If you had no time, you wouldn't hear any notes. There needs to be motion. Similar with astronomy, if you don't have motion, all you have is an object in space, and that's geometry. Geometry is still, it doesn't move. But when you have planets and they move in space, well, that's astronomy. So on the one side you have a theory of number, and on the other side you have a theory of space. The number is just abstract numbers, so everything with number, arithmetic, algebra, calculus, mathematics, other things. And then in the theory of space you have geometry and trigonometry, which use mathematics in order to calculate spatial areas. And these two have to do with number. They're of matter and spirit. The theory of number leads to the application of number. The theory of space leads to the applications of space. And these applications deal with quantity and extension, and they're of matter only. So application of number, you have music, physics, chemistry, deals all with matter. Music, you need a musical instrument to play with it. You can create it with your vocal cords, but that's still in matter. Numbers are abstract. Then we can apply them in reality. The same thing for space. Trigonometry, geometry. And when we apply continuous quantity in space, then we get to astronomy and architecture and creating the geometry into three-dimensional shapes to live in. And we have geography, and then we have engineering, other aspects of creating. Alright, so we'll move on to image 2. Now we're getting into language and reality. So communication is about common ground understanding, coming to terms, a oneness in truth of reality. You communicate symbols about reality. So we're not going to communicate in order to remain in conflict, in order to remain on different pages, on different levels of understanding. No, when we communicate, we want to get a common ground understanding. We want to get on the same page. We want to come to terms. We want to have a oneness of understanding the truth of reality. That's why you have to often define your terms, because you can say one word and you mean one thing, and someone hears the word and they understand something else, and then semantic misunderstandings develop. This is why an understanding of language and logic is very important in order to communicate properly, because these semantic misunderstandings happen frequently in conversations where people don't even end up talking about the same thing, and it goes on for hours, and they don't even realize that the problem is in the language. So language and reality is where we're dealing with metaphysics or ontology itself, and this is the science of being. Anything that's being, that's what metaphysics is. It's anything that's being. And we'll get more into that later. So it's a thing as it exists in reality. Everything exists. So just a hint at what's coming. You have substance and you have non-substance, which is an accident. You have a substance, which is, say, my remote controller or myself. And then you have accidents or non-substances, and that would be the color white, which are things that happen to be there that aren't necessary, that aren't essential. So the cup could be white, it could be gray, it could be black, it could be green. The color isn't essential. So all these things exist. The color exists. It's not a thing that exists in itself. Anyways, we're going to be getting into that more after. So when we get from metaphysics, we're going to break into the three aspects of consciousness again, which are grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So in the grammar side, we have the thing as it is symbolized. You recall back in the first image, we had grammar, which is symbols. Logic was thinking, and rhetoric was communication. So in grammar, it's the thing as it is symbolized when we're looking at things as they exist. So in grammar, the thing as it exists is, as it is symbolized, something is perceived. That's the grammar. Next, it's the thing as it is known. We learn about it. And that's the logic, which is the art of arts. And that's what directs all our action, which is the point of the 7 liberal arts. That's why logic is central to everything. Because it's what directs our actions. It's the reasoning for why we do things. And logic is the master art in Sister Miriam Joseph's terms, but I say rhetoric is the master art in Sister Miriam Joseph's words. But I say logic is the master art. Logic is the art of arts. Logic is everything. Of course, you need rhetoric. You need to output, because if you know things and you don't act on them, then you know nothing, essentially. And it's worthless knowledge. Like I said, stimulus and response without the central part of processing your information. All you are is a robot. I've explained this in other articles relating with language and reality. So the third part is the thing as it is we communicate it. After something is perceived, we learn about it, then we communicate it. It's a thing as it is symbolized, the thing as it is known, and then the thing as it is communicated. But to know something, you need logic. Then we get to the norms. The norms of grammar are correctness. You need to have your correct input, or else your processing and your output will be skewed. I would say proportionally directly related to the correctness or incorrectness of your input. If you're inputting garbage, you will output garbage. If you are inputting quality, you will output quality. So logic has to do with truth and correct thinking, the conformity of thought with reality. That's aligning our thoughts with reality, our perceptions with reality. Uniting thoughts with reality, harmonizing thoughts with reality, bringing our thoughts and our perceptions into equilibrium with reality so that we're not in contradiction with reality. That's what logic is all about. So again, I'm always going to stress the importance of logic, because that's where you sink or swim. That's where the processing is. You got to input correctly, but if you don't process it correctly, you could have all the best information in the world, and you're not going to process it correctly, and then you're not going to output properly into the world in the wisdom of right action. So with rhetoric, the norm is considered effectiveness, and this is what I would consider part of this focus of effectiveness of rhetoric I explained in the part 4 of the Language and Reality article series entitled Dark, Negative, and Limited Trivium, in which I discussed why the effectiveness is, as a focus, overrides the supremacy and the mastery of logic in order to direct our actions. When you focus more on the effectiveness of the reception of your message or other qualities, then you lose sight of the primary, most important capital, which is truth. So the material and function of grammar is phonetics, where we combine sounds. That's the way sounds sound. Spelling is the combination of letters, which are symbols to represent those sounds, and the grammar is the combination of words from those letters and all the other symbols. That's the grammar. Logic is where we combine the concepts, and the rhetoric is where we combine the sentences from the concepts and the grammar in order to output them and communicate to ourselves and others about reality. Next up is image number 3. So we're continuing from language and reality. So in language, there's a nature and a function of language. It's a system of symbols for the expression of consciousness, thoughts, emotions, and volition, will, or action. And if you're familiar with my other work in regards to the circle of life, what I term the circle of life, which has to do with consciousness, causality, and the trivium, I've already related how grammar, logic, and rhetoric relates to thought, emotion, and action in the way we live our lives. They're not specifically correlated directly, but in the wheel of the circle of life that I've constructed, one thing follows from the other, and it works beautifully. So if you're not familiar with that, check into the Circle of Life presentation infographic that I did. So from these aspects of consciousness, these expressions of consciousness, we're able to create a communication of ideas. From language, we're able to communicate ideas because we create a system of symbols for the expression of our consciousness to express reality and ourselves in reality. So when we communicate ideas, we can do an imitation, an artificial likeness. So we can create a painting, we can draw a sketch, take a photograph, make a cartoon, create a statue, make a gesture. These are representations of something in reality. An imitation, artificial likeness, it's an image. But it's not an image in our mind, it's actually an image in reality, but it imitates something that really does exist as itself. You know, a statue is an imitation of a man. It's not a man itself. A painting isn't a landscape. The landscape itself is the landscape in nature. A painting is just a painting of a landscape. Now, apart from the bare imitation, artificial likeness, we actually have symbols which are an arbitrary sensible sign with an imposed meaning that we give it. So it's a sensible sign because it's a sign that we use our senses in order to detect. I suppose I'll make possibly an error, but sensible, you can even use auditory. So a symbol that we speak that has a certain phonetics, that's a symbol, but it's sensible. It's a sensible sign because we can hear it. Something that we can see is also sensible. The letter S, Y, M, B, O, L, symbol. That word, the letters, those 6 letters are sensible signs. The 6 letters together is another sensible sign. It's symbols added up together. The combining of symbols, and then we impose a meaning upon it. We imbue those symbols with a meaning. You could look at a circle with a dot. Like, oh, that's the sun or the earth with a cross. And there's all symbols that we can recognize sensibly with our senses, and we can recognize meaning from it. So we have meaning from nature and a meaning from convention. There's an inherent meaning in things from nature, and then there's a conventional meaning that we impose and that can change over time as people decide to change the meaning of something in reality and the symbol, the communicated symbol that represents it. You have common symbols and special symbols. So the common symbols would be our language that we use to communicate every day, and then there's special symbols such as specialists use in their specific field, chemistry, physics, mathematics, symbols that most people wouldn't recognize because they're only for special case communications about those fields. Whereas common symbols, well, everyone who uses that common base understands what it is, because it's the commonality they use. And that's part of the common ground understanding of communication. You want to use languages that people understand, or else you're essentially encrypting information in reality, which I've gone into in part 3 of the Language and Reality series, how we encrypt reality and how language essentially is it's a mode to decrypt reality and communicate about it, but it's also an encryption, because if you know a language and someone else doesn't, then 2 people can communicate in a language and someone else won't know what they're talking about. So a language is a way to encrypt reality in a sense, even though it's used, created, devised in order to facilitate communication about reality, in order for us to be on a common page understanding. But if someone else is excluded from that common page of understanding, then reality becomes encrypted for them with reference to us communicating about it. So symbols all reference something that exists or has existed in fact or fiction, whether we create it in our mind, there's a word for it, there's a symbol for it, we draw something, there's always a representation for something that has existed or is existing now or will exist in fact or fiction. There's always a symbol for it. That's how we communicate about everything. That's how we see things. That's how we hear things. It's all a symbolic representation. Because a sound could mean anything. You could say red, well, red means a color, but I could invent a new language and use the word red, that phonetics, and it would mean water. It could mean anything. The symbols are arbitrary sensible signs, but we impose meaning. That's when we imbue the meaning onto them. And once you give it a meaning, if you're going to change the meaning, then you're going to create confusion. And there'll be ignorance. Then people will desire to control because they won't understand reality. So when you create a reference to reality through a symbol, it should stay that way and not be altered through the conventions of society as it progresses in time in order to change and alter meanings. Next image, image number 4, follows from the previous one. So from symbol we go down, then there's a dotted arrow. Now from symbol we're going specifically into word. So spoken language is the original and fundamental system of symbols for which all other signs are merely substituted. As we go back to image 2, mentioned in the material and function of language, for grammar we have phonetics, which is the combining of sounds. And then we get to spelling and then to grammar, from sounds to letters to words. And that's what on image number 4 here. Spoken language is the original and fundamental system of symbols, in which all others later come. So the word is a symbol. It's a metaphysical conceptualization for philosophical understanding. So in the conceptual understanding, these are the phantasms, images, and concepts in our mind. There's 2 types of symbols. One's of matter, and there's symbols of form. The of matter is the sensible sign, and there's 2 parts, not 2 types, 2 parts to symbol, the word and symbols. Symbols have form and they have matter. The matter part is the sensible sign, and the form part is the imposed meaning. So matter, it's physical, it's around us, it's sensible. We can see it. It's detectable. It's the first intrinsic and purely potential principle of a corporeal essence. So corporeal essence is just something that exists in reality. Now the form takes that pure potential matter that can be anything, and it arranges the components, it coordinates them into a specific shape. That's the imposed meaning, because you can have matter. Matter is everywhere in our reality. Not all matter looks the same. It has a certain chemical structure or atomic structure, sorry. So you can have steel, which is made up of stuff. You can have just iron. You can have copper. You can have wood. So there's different types of matter, and they're all made up of different things. But you can have a chair that's made up of wood or made up of a certain type of metal. So the matter doesn't matter, and the matter does matter to create the form, but the type of matter doesn't. It's the form that gives it the shape. Anyways, there's more on that coming. I just wanted to briefly explain it. So the form is the first intrinsic and actual principle of a corporeal essence. The matter is the potential to be something once it has a form, and the form is the actual. We'll be getting more into the potential and actual part of matter and form. So matter, the word type is spoken and written, and for spoken, the matter of spoken is sound. That's the sensible sign of the matter. When it's spoken, it's through sound, and that's the study of phonetics. When the symbol is the written type, then it's a notation of matter as a sensible sign, and that's spelling, the study of spelling. And form is everything. The word type is everything, spoken, written, everything. There's always a form. The form is what gives meaning to all the words, all the sensible signs we create. And the form is the study of semantics. That's why you have semantic misunderstandings when person A uses a specific term and it has a specific meaning in a form, the person B doesn't receive that meaning and form, and they understood something else. And now the path diverges. Now they're on two separate paths. They're not on the common ground. They're not on the same page. They're not on the same level. Now things diverge. And if you keep progressing that way, which is how everyone progresses usually in a conversation in our society, then things diverge. You get confusion. You get conflicts. Things do not turn out right because people don't understand language and reality. I understood this aspect of semantic misunderstandings even before I knew of the term trivium, which I learned of in 2010, because I was already using grammar and logic and rhetoric, even though I didn't know of it as the trivium and I didn't study grammar, but I did study logic, and I understood these problems in communication that can arise, known as semantic misunderstandings. So that's why it's important to have a proper, accurate definition of a word, which can be found in etymology, and we can de-obfuscate and decloud the conventional meaning and go back to the original meaning that the word was created to mean, rather than the changes as have been applied through the conventions of society over time. So your symbol is of matter and of form. There's matter and form. In the matter side, that's where we're going to relate it to an individual specific thing, because it's corporeal essence. It's the potential of the corporeal essence, and that's the individual specifics. Now on the other side, we have the essence and nature, which relates to form, because the essence and nature is what will provide, in this model, it'll provide the information for the potential matter to organize, coordinate its components, and form the shape that it's supposed to take. So a side note, if you know about Rupert Sheldrake, this relates to the morphogenetic field, whereby the morphogenetic field informs the matter that is shaped for specific beings, for specific entities, for specific animals. So different animals have different morphogenetic fields. They have different forms. They have different blueprints that they ascribe to, and that they receive their information in order for basic programmed functionality for existence. Just survival and mechanistic operations, those things that we don't necessarily learn. So that's the essence and nature of the form, which informs the matter. The matter is informed by the form, and the form informs the matter. So below the individual and specific, essence and nature, we can see that the individual and the specific is an existing being. This is where we can apply the law of identity with things that exist in reality, and we can see the difference in the multiplicity, the variability, and the diversity of existence, reality, and universe. From the form side, essence and nature, this is what makes a being what it is. This is the kind and class, the likeness. So you have all humans. That's our species. That's where the essence and nature of the form comes from, the morphogenetic blueprint, in order for us to all look alike. That's our likeness, our kind, our class. And as we apply more differentia, going towards the existing being, that's when more differences apply. So you get the basic blueprint of a human, but then more differences apply. So you have different races, you have different even within the different races, there's different tribal specificity, where there's been differences through changes in location and geography. Even though it's technically one of the major races, there's still differentia within the subspecies. So that's where you have the more and more variability, the more diversity, the more multiplicity is from that differentia being applied in greater degrees from the form, the essence, and nature towards the individual specific matter of the existing being, that thing which is itself and not another, that makes it different from others. So we have these processes which are going to be related more later. We have matter, which goes to the individual, which things that exist. We have form, which is the essence, and kind and class and likeness. We have induction and deduction logic, which will be explained a bit more after this. But we have the apophatic, negation, deduction, the separating, the division. And that's how we arrive at the difference in the law of identity. Is through looking at the differentia, we can deduce what things are. In the separation, in the division of the universe, everything combined and turned into one. There's separation, there's division, and we can look through the negative by removing things, the apophatic path, and we can deduce the law of identity, we can deduce essences and differences and sameness. So that's going from the kind and class. We apply the apophatic negative deduction, separation, division to go through the differentia and arrive at the existing being, the law of identity, the difference. And conversely, if we start from existing being, we can get to the kind class likeness through induction. And that's cataphatic, and that's an affirmation of what is, to induct and join and unite what is in order to formulate generalized concepts about reality. That's why there's the bigger blue arrows, which is existing being. Well, you get there from the cataphatic affirmation, and the kind, class, and likeness, you get there from you use, so the existing being, law of identity, difference, you use cataphatic affirmation, induction, joining, unity to get to the general concept, the kind, class, likeness, to understand that. And the inverse is true for the other side. So where you have your kind, class, likeness, you're going to use apophatic, negation, deduction, separation, division in order to arrive at more differences and the existing beings, the identifiable things that exist in reality. So further, matter, individual, specific, existing thing, that's the individual. And on the other side, you have species, and then further genus. And that's how we look at things. We have me, a particular individual, then you have the species, which is man, then you have the genus, animal, whatever, and the species genus is a repetitive loop. You can go from specific to general, and then your general can become your specific, and then you find another general to become the new general, or you go downwards. Anyways, it might be confusing. What's a parent-child relationship? If you're aware of programming, you can look into it. Genus is the parent, species is the child, and then species becomes the parent for the individual particular, which then becomes the child. So the genus is the species with the common essence, and the species is the individuals with the common essence. So the genus is the specific general, species general loop, which I just explained. And if you go more towards the aggregate, if you go more towards the particular from the species, then you have numerous individuals. Then you can form aggregate groups of individuals. So you have political parties. You know, they're not a species. You can't go from an individual to a political party species. It's not a human being. It's not a new species. It's not a genus. It's not an animal. It's an aggregate grouping of individuals, and they can be. You can have a grouping of different species. You can have humans and birds and cats and a bunch of different things, and that'll be an aggregate grouping of individuals. So in the individual, from going from kind, class, likeness to the existing being, you have more differentia, so you have more definition, you have more characteristics, and more difference. When you're going up in the levels towards the more likeness, the more general kind and class, you have less definition, less characteristics, and things are more similar. So that was probably a lot of information, but if you read the book by Sister Miriam Joseph, this image will probably help you a lot. And if you don't read it, I'm not sure how much my explanations themselves will provide clarity required. But if you read the book, I'm sure it'll make a lot more sense. But in an infographic way like this, it might be difficult in my explanation. It works better if you explain it yourself and you understand the material yourself, and this is more of a reference to remind you of the complexity of how these things work. Because if you just read it yourself, it's hard to come up with this understanding. That's why I visualized what I was reading, and I created these flowcharts, these infographics for people to more easily understand this material, because it can be quite complex to understand. So I would recommend that you are familiar with the content so that you can understand more clearly what I'm talking about. Because I'm not going into big elaborate explanations for all these things. That's why there are books for such tasks. So please go learn more. Image number 5. Creating symbols from reality. This is about generating a concept. We're going to be getting more into what particulars and universals are, but to start off, we've already been talking about it in the previous image when we went from matter, the individual specific existing thing, to essence and nature of the form, which is kind, class, and likeness. This is the same thing. The particular is the individual specific, which we can relate to of matter, and then when we look at the universal, that's the of form, which is where we find the essence. So when we process particulars, we're looking at the real object, the primary substance, the material. It's limited to locality as a place and time. When you're processing universals, though, it's a concept. It's not something that necessarily actually exists as a real object that concretely exists in reality. These are conceptual things like the color green or an animal. An animal doesn't exist itself. It's a classification for things that exist in reality that are known as animals under that genus, animals. But animal, there is no thing that is an animal. It doesn't exist itself. So that's a concept. It's knowledge of the essence. The animal is the essence, that we're all the same. All the animals are the same because we're all animals. That's our essence. It's part of our essence. It's part of our definition. And it's immaterial. Like I said, it doesn't exist in itself. It can't exist. An animal can't exist as an animal. It has to exist through a human that is an animal. A cat that is an animal. And these things are non-local, they're non-temporal, they're just in your mind. You can conceptualize animality any place, any time. It's not dependent upon that. It doesn't exist in time and space. So the way we find these particulars and universals and process them is through our senses. I have an article on the senses and how we need to trust those more than we do technology. Technology can show us a lot of things, yes, but if you're using technology to override what your senses are showing you, then you're failing miserably in your ability to perceive, conceive, understand, and navigate reality. When your technology overrides your senses, plants are animals. Didn't you know? Why? Because we got technology now that can show us that that plants sense in many, many different ways. 15, 20, 25 senses So now all of a sudden, plants are animals. Everything else that we see with our eyes, that they have eyes, that they have ears, that they have mouths, they have tongues, they have teeth, they have lungs, they have hearts, they have brains. You know, they're animals like us, but no, now there's humans, and there's plants and animals. Plants and animals are the same, and then there's humans. So this is how retarded people become when they don't want to face reality and the truth. And yes, I did say retarded because you are idiotic retards when you believe that plants are animals. You need to go connect to reality. Anyways, that's a side topic. I just wanted to mention the importance of senses in understanding reality and generating concepts over technology. Same thing with the quantum world. I don't give a shit about any of the quantum world. I understand quantum reality better than everybody in the New Age movement and better than most of these pseudo-scientists who got these PhDs and pretend they're scientists but don't even understand what the experiment shows. You do not live in the quantum world. I do not live in the quantum world. Why are idiots projecting blind correspondences, blind as above, so below, from the quantum world to our manifested reality without understanding the principle of emergent properties and the system, the whole, is greater than the sum of its parts? People just, oh yeah, we're just quantum energy. Anyways, people do not understand how to process reality properly because they're not using their senses, they're not using their minds, they're not thinking. They read what other people say and then they gobble it up as reality because it allows them to reinforce their preconceptions about reality and sustain the attachment and maintenance of that falsity. And they don't need to change anything because they can just keep believing the same bullshit. So quantum world, I don't really care. Plants feel, congratulations, they're not animals. Move along. Get connected to reality. So our senses, first they start externally. We have our five senses. There's an object present in reality, and then we develop a perceptual image. This is the most vivid sense apprehension, but it's the less clear in knowledge. There's hardly any knowledge when we just perceive things. We can perceive a color, perceive a shape, perceive certain things. And that's the most vivid. It's right in our senses. Then we bring that perceptual image from the objects that are present in reality. We bring that perceptual image. Now it's internal. We bring it into our imagination. We got an image in our imagination, and that's a phantasm. It's a mental image of that object. Now with this mental image, we can develop more knowledge. We can correlate it with other things in our comprehension of reality, and we can create correspondences and connections and interlink patterns. But in this image of the mind, it's less vivid. It's not right in front of our eyes where we can continue to get details and specifics and go into more detail of the pixels we see in front of us. It's less vivid. But because we can manipulate it in our mind, we can derive more knowledge from it. So the imagination is really powerful. This is what we use the most. Apart from the imagination, there's other internal senses, which Sister Miriam Joseph listed as instinct, common sense, and sensuous memory. And sensuous memory would be the memory of things of our senses. We recall smells, sights, not memory of knowledge and abstract concepts. That's for later. So on the right side of infographic number 5, another way to express how we process reality. We have a particular extant objects in reality. Then we have our sense stimulus. That's the first phase of our consciousness, where it's a stimulus response. If we don't take it further, it's just input, output. Our second step is the percept, where from our sense stimulus experiences, we're going to connect those sense experiences, and we're going to form perceptions of reality from those experiences and senses. Different senses coming together is going to form a certain perception of reality, and that's going to become part of our memory. So the percept deals more with memory, and the sense stimulus is just basic input for you to output. And then your percept is you create a reference between many senses, and you create a perception of reality in your memory. And the third phase is conceptual. That's where you connect percept instances in memory. So the perceptions you previously created in the second phase, where you connected experiences, those connected experiences that create memories, you can further connect those different memories, those different perceptual instances of reality into abstract ideas, concepts about reality. And this is how we start from the particular, extant object in reality, and we're going towards the universal, the abstract ideas. The universals are known this way. We're abstractly integrating concepts and abstractions from abstractions. So we're taking the concepts we previously integrated, the previous abstract ideas, integrating them together, and we're taking those abstract conceptions and we're going to abstract even more from those abstractions to get even more abstract generalities about reality and connect things even more. Alright, next image up is number 6, creating symbols from reality, part 2. More flowcharts on how we generate a concept. On the left we have, starting with reality and nature, which is our raw material for input. Then we get to our senses. From our senses, as we saw in the previous infographic, get to our imagination, our internal senses. From our external senses, from the imagination and intellect, we're able to abstract the commonality of similar objects that exists in reality, which is our raw material for input. These abstractions of commonality will lead us to the essence of things. The essence is the form, as we saw in previous infographic. So from the essence, we get the general universal concept, which contains the form. These are from reality and from the mind. There's an objective norm in reality. There's something that exists in reality. Then in the mind, there's a subjective arbitrary symbol. From the arbitrary symbol and the objective norm in reality, we're trying to obtain truth. That's why we arrive at the general universal concept, which is represented through mind and reality. That's why on infographic number 2, we had logic, and we had the norm of logic was the conformity of thought with reality. Now coming back to infographic number 6, that's what we're about. We're about thought and reality, mind and reality. We need to join them, make them congruent, cohesive, integrated, united, harmonized, not opposed, not disunited, not disintegrated. So the objective norm in reality needs to align with the arbitrary symbol that we subjectively appropriate. That's why understanding the meaning of words is important, because that's where the truth is about reality, is in the meaning of the word. And if anyone wants to use a word and create a new meaning for it, well, that creates confusion, and it leads us away from truth, of understanding our reality. On the right side, we have a more basic description. First, you got your data. Then it goes into senses. You could either say that's 5 pieces of data into one sense, or that's 1 piece of data into 5 senses, or 1 piece of data representing 1 sense. It doesn't matter. I just put 5 because it's 5 sentences. 5 senses. It fits. From our senses, we get to our perceptions, and that's where we start. So the data, the senses, that's automatic. I've explained this in the last Language and Reality series, part 5 on logic, that the data input of the senses is the most easiest thing we can do. All we do is just look. All we do is just receive. We hear a sound, we see something, see a ball rolling, see something move, that's just our senses. That is where things start for us, but it's not where it starts for us to understand. Those are just perceptions of reality. We don't derive much understanding from that. Understanding comes from logic in processing reality. So our perceptions start is where we have knowledge on the observations from reality. We sense and we perceive. That's where the things start. That's where the grammar starts. Next, we get to the logic, the induction, not the deduction because that comes later to verify our concepts, but the induction part in order to create and generate the general universal concepts. So that's the method. First we have the start, then we have the method. That's the abstractions from the grounded measurable relationships in concretes, in the potential of matter that exists. And from that induction, we integrate our perceptions into conceptions. And that's why you need logic. Perception to conception does not occur without logic. So you would never have any conceptions without logic. All you would have would be perceptions. And your understanding of reality would be immensely limited. It would be more simplified, absolutely. It would live in simplicity. Can't say it's wrong. I'm not sure I would desire that, given the gifts of higher order consciousness and the capacity to think, but it'd be less evil, that's for sure. So when we integrate into our concepts, into conceptions from logic, that's the form. The method was to create the conceptions. The form of the conception is what results. That's the shape that we result from our input of perceptions, the knowledge of observations in reality. We abstract, measurable relationships from that grounded information, and then those relationships get formulated into conceptions. We use abstractions to identify aspects of reality. So reality induces conceptions, which are abstractions, and then we can use those abstractions to further identify and deduce aspects of reality. Logic is powerful. It's the most important. Image number 7, part 3 of creating symbols from reality, generating a concept. So these 3 infographics were just different flowcharts, different ways of representing how we create symbols from reality. So tying to infographic number 5, which was at the top, processing particulars and processing universals, here we get a similar correspondence. We have our language symbols, and there's 4 types. One is symbolized by individuals, which is more with processing particulars, and in the language symbols, the other side symbolizes essence, which is the general and universal. So the symbols aren't the particular, they aren't the universal, but they're symbols for the individual particular and symbols for the general essence. We need these symbols to communicate about these things in reality. So the individual can be a proper name, the essence can be a common name. The individual is a particular empirical description or experience. It's an object, place, time, something that experiences in reality as the thing itself, and the essence is the general universal description, general categories for reference, so the things that things belong to. Human, cat, dog, belong to the general of animal, the genus. So we have our natural object, which is where we're inside of it, where the form is, where the universal is. That's where we find our substance, the essence, the nature, the form, species, and genera. These are all similar but distinct aspects. Substance, essence, nature, form, species, genera. They're all Yeah, they're similar, but they're distinct. Anyways, look into those yourself if you want to know the specific differences. And these are symbolized by the common name. And that's the general, not the proper name, not the specific things, not the particular things in reality. And the common name, the general universal, this substance and essence and form, is what leads us to the definition, to express the knowledge of a concept, of that universal general. So when we have symbolized by common name, on the right we have common names. Common names are a simple concept, such as the natural species, a human being. And then we have, from that simple concept, we can develop other common names. We can construct composite concepts, such as a lawyer or athlete. That's not a being in itself. It's a composite concept. We're taking a human being and a profession, a doing, a task, and then we're attributing it this new symbol, a common name called lawyer, athlete. So these constructs, they add definition to the natural species through the accidents, such as a specific action that you take, such as law or hockey or basketball, football. Those are accidental qualities to the natural species. You don't have to have that. And that's another way we can differentiate particulars and individuals, through these composite concepts that add definition to our reality, add differentia, make things more different. Image number 8. Alright, I believe this is the last part, yeah. Number 4, part 4 of creating symbols from reality, generating a concept. Again, these are just flowcharts on understanding how we go from reality to generating an understanding of reality. Nature provides the substance that already exists. From these substances that already exist, we can create artificial objects. And artificial is it's an art from our arms, because we create with our hands, our arms. And this is aesthetics, to represent the good in the things we create. Visually, that's where the beauty comes from. And these are things, the artificial objects are fashioned by man. They come from substances that exist already inherently in nature. And we change them, we alter them. These artificial objects have two essences. Again, going back to, I think, infographic 4, image number 4, we got the matter and the form. So now we're tying back to that. We got nature, substance, things that exist, and we create things from those things that exist. The things that we create, there's two aspects to them. Even the things that already existed, there's two aspects to them. But the things we create, such as a chair, a table, or a toy, well, that's the form that informs the matter. And the matter is wood, metal, or plastic. But it'll create the chair, table, or toy that'll be the same. It'll just be the matter that's informed by the form that creates, that shapes and coordinates the components of the wood, of the metal, of the plastic, into making it the specific shape that it becomes. So that's why in the form is where you find the definition, because the chair is the definition of the thing. The table, the toy, what it does, is where you'll find the definition. You're not going to find it in the wood or the metal or the plastic of that chair, table, or toy. That's not where the definition is. That was the potential to become the actual chair, table, toy. That's why before there was matter as the first, what is it? One second. First intrinsic and purely potential principle of a corporeal essence versus, as opposed to the form, which is the first intrinsic and actual principle of a corporeal essence. The form is actual, the matter is potential. The matter has the potential to become the many different forms that exist. So in the middle flowchart we have reality. From reality we abstract images, ideas, and concepts, and then we classify them into symbols and words. This is the most basic one. These three bubbles in this flowchart is as simple as it gets. Reality to images, ideas, and concepts, and then we classify them into symbols and words in order to express those images from our mind to other people. Because if you got reality, you induce it and you form concepts, well, okay, that's all inside of you and you have concepts, ideas, and images. But if you're not going to classify them and find a way to express those images and create symbols and words, well, then it just ends up staying inside of you. And you don't share with anyone, and no one else is able to share with you, so everyone is just living in ignorance. And on the left side, from symbol, we get the two major classifications of particular and general, or particular and universal. Then we get down to the four kinds. This is where we get more into Aristotle's work. So there's the four kinds, which are the pre-predicamenta, and then there's, after the four kinds, you get into the 10 categories, which are coming up, and that's the actual predicamente. And then there's additional 3+ subcategories, 10+, 15+, 1,000,000+, who cares? These are subcategories, additional categories, which were of lesser importance, and Aristotle termed these the post-predicamenta. So we're going to get into the four kinds and the 10 categories of being. So we've already discussed, partially, the particular and the universal. Image number 9. This is an infographic about the 10 categories of being. Being is what exists. This is the core of metaphysics. If we go back to infographic 2, language and reality, it's all about describing reality, which is what language is for. And reality is the thing as it exists, and that's the purpose of metaphysics or ontology, which is the science of being, the science of things that exist. So, from being, we have the particular and the universal, and we have 4 pre-predicamenta, which I'll explain later, after the 10 categories. So even though in the infographic 8, we had symbol, particular, universal, 4 kinds, 10 categories, because that's the way it actually goes, because you have the particular accident, the particular substance, and then you have the universal accident and the universal substance. But since I haven't gone into substances and accidents yet, I'll cover the 10 categories and then go back to the pre-predicamenta to show the 4 kinds and how they apply to the primary parts of the 10 categories of being, which are substance and non-substance. So from being, things that exist, the first most important thing is the substance, which is anything that exists in itself. It's an object, a thing necessary for something to exist. In substances, there's 2 different kinds, the particular substance and the universal substance. The particular substance is the primary substance. It's the concrete object, like me or Socrates or anybody else. It's the specific thing. Then you have the universal substance, which is a secondary substance, which is predicated and said of the first substance. We'll get into predication after this as well. So instead of concrete objects that exist in reality, these are the classes and the abstracts that are within those concrete objects that make it part of what it is. So man is a general universal, which is said of the first substance, which is Socrates. And the universal substance is, again, a symbol for essence, which we saw on 2 infographics on infographic number 7, where we had language and symbols, the 4 types. symbols of individuals or symbols of essences. So now we come back here, it's corresponding it again. The symbols for essences are the universal substances, and the symbols for individuals are the particular substances. So we're just adding more detail. I can't put everything in one infographic, you know, it's just too much information, so I gotta chop it up and relate things as we go along. So after substance, which is the first category, we have non-substance, which is accident, and it's not number 2 because it's not the thing itself. It's a classification for the other things, for the other 9. It's a non-substance, which is what number 1 is. Now, in non-substance, which is accident, you have quantity, quality, relation, temporal relation, spatial relation, posture, having, action, and passion. These are the accidents. These are things that exist in another, and in another would be in substance. So non-substance, the accident, exists in substance. Without substance, you don't have non-substance to exist. You don't have accidental properties and characteristics to exist if you don't have a substance. So these are properties and events. They're non-substance, and it's a possibility to exist in a substance. As I said earlier with the cup being white, gray, black, or green, or blue. It's a possibility for a color, a particular color, to exist, but it's not an essential property for it to be that thing that it is. Even matter, in a sense, is the type of matter is not required. It could be wood, it could be plastic, it could be a metal cup. Those are accidental aspects to that substance. Because the matter could be any type of matter. There does need to be matter, there needs to be substance, but the type of matter is accidental, it's not essential. The form is what is essential, because the form is the essence that informs the matter to become what it is. Like I said before, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, you need to go read more, because these are complex concepts to understand, and I'm just describing them briefly using visual aids. But there's more information to be learned through actual reading detailed descriptions of what these things mean. And these infographics will help facilitate an understanding and a correspondence between aspects of reality. But I still recommend people do their homework and read. I'm only facilitating that task. That's what my work is to do. I'm trying to make things, bring things to people's attention that they're not aware of, so that they can do more learning as I have done on my own. I can't express every single thing I know. From accident, we'll start on the left, then we'll go to the right. We'll go by the number. Well, actually, we'll go from the right. We won't pay attention to the numbers. The numbers I got from other people's work, I think, or directly from Sister Miriam Joseph's book. She has them numbered. I don't remember where I took the numbers from. I might have taken them from someone else who ordered them differently. Anyways, on the right we have relation to others. So something, substance, in relation to another. That has to do with containment, because if you're something that exists, you're contained in time and space. So you're in a when, a time, and you're in a where, a place. The thing has a relation to another, but it's an accidental relation, because you don't have to be. A cup can exist now, it can exist in the past, it can exist in the future. Sorry, that's not what I meant. The whiteness in the cup is an accident. That whiteness can exist now, it can exist later, it can exist in a different thing. No, sorry. I'm confusing things. The whiteness is a quality. The relation, the time, and the space itself that something is in, the substance itself. Yeah, the original explanation I was giving was accurate before I got mixed up into color. The thing itself has a relation to other things, and this is temporal and spatial. So it relates to another event, events relate to other events. They're related temporally, they're related in space. Some things happen in space that require space to happen. So these are all accidental properties. The thing that happened could have happened somewhere else in space on the planet, and it could have happened in another time. It could have happened 10 seconds ago, or 10 seconds later. That would have been at a different time, but it would have still have happened. So this is relation to others. For the substance has relations. And then the substance also has properties and characteristics. And these are inheritance, things that are inherited, such as quantity, how much, which is discrete and continuous, which we saw back with the quadrivium, which had to do with matter, and continuous and discrete matter, so parts distinct from parts. And there's also quality, the nature of form, the kind. You also have color, which is in the quality. Essentially, the way I use quality is property, characteristic, quality, attribute, and what was the fifth word I used to use? These are all aspects of existence. Everything has a quality, everything has characteristics and property. It's not just, oh, well, relation isn't a property or a well, it is technically a property or characteristic, because when something exists, it exists at a certain time in a certain space. So those aspects become part of the properties and characteristics of that thing. They're not essential to it, they're accidental to it, but it's still, as I define it, a property and a characteristic, a quality. I don't use, in terms of the 10 categories of being, property and characteristic has this specific definition, and quality has a specific definition as for kind, nature, or form. But in my own work, before I got into metaphysics and more into the trivium, I was describing aspects of the multiplicity, diversity, and variability of reality as properties, characteristics, attributes, and qualities. Now, apart from inheritance, we have directedness. And from directedness and direction is intermediacy, which is your own posture and position, or having a state or condition that the substance is currently in, which can change. It can be in motion or not in motion. It can be tilted or not tilted, at an angle or not an angle. And the other directedness is movement. The specific action, is it doing something else? Is it in the process of changing? Passion. Is it being affected by something? Is it undergoing something? Is something imposing something? Is it receiving a force upon it in order to change? Or is it changing internally on its own, manifesting action from itself? So these are essentially the 10 categories of being. They're all numbered. And if you want to know more, go look into it. This is just a general overview to explain what metaphysics generally talks about. It talks about the 10 categories of being, and it's primarily substance and non-substance, which is accident, and those are related to the 4 kinds, which we are going to be getting into now. And the 4 kinds are the pre-predicamente. Sorry, we're going to get into that in future slides. Now we're going to infographic 10, and we're going to elaborate more on matter and form, which we briefly discussed in words and symbols from infographic 4, and were briefly mentioned again in infographic number 8. So on number 10, matter and form. Matter deals with the material, the composition, wood, sand, or even atoms themselves, and the form deals with the shape, the assembly, the coordination. The matter is the potential to make something from something else, and the form is the actual thing that results from the parts used to make it, the chair, the table, or the toy. The matter is the component's potential, that's why it's a potential, together to create something else. You can discover something new from the old and current. It's the potential to discover something new from the current, from the matter. The form has the differentia, the things that set it apart. In the matter, things come together, but in the form, forms are different because they set them apart. A chair is not a table and not a toy. So forms exclude from other forms, or exclusions from the group. They set things apart. The essence is seen through this differentia. Abstraction, it draws away. It takes from, pulls away, detaches, diverts. You take from the pieces, the parts, to make a bigger picture. That's how you create a concept, a universal, from the particulars, is by abstracting from the pieces the parts to make that bigger picture. You add similarities together. It's smaller aspects of the larger. And that's how you get to the larger from those smaller ones. In form, instead of abstraction, you have derivation. So you can see how this is matter relates to induction and form relates to deduction. And we've seen that in the infographic 4 when I was talking about the inductive aspect to arrive at the general concept and the deductive aspect to arrive at the particular. Yes. Okay, so form, derivation, it's etymologically matter. Abstraction was to draw away, and in derivation it's from the stream. So you're taking from the stream, you're leading off, you're turning away. So you're subtracting pieces, looking at the unique parts to make up the concept. So in the abstraction, you're taking from the parts, you're trying to get a bigger picture. In the form, you're already at the bigger picture and you're trying to derive and subtract pieces to look at the unique parts that make up the picture. You're going to remove the similarities to find the differences. So, and just above, that's why we have differentia, exclusion from the group. This all has to do. You'll see how it ties into deduction. And just to note, the works don't specifically mention this. These are correspondences that I made myself, that I'm adding more information in order to relate metaphysics, language, and reality. How it directly relates to logic, and logic is the central most important thing. Because these parts here, abstraction and derivation, adding and removing, that's all logic. So you'll see by the end, you'll see how induction and deduction relate to matter and form, and those other relations, and essential predication, accidental predication relate to this as well. Now back to the left side on matter. From matters, this is how we're getting from a new definition from part of an existing old definition. These are the correlations from matter and form and other parts of reality. We take from what is already there, and we find something within the existence of reality. The existing parts of reality. The existence. Those are things that exist. So you take what's already there and you find something within what already exists. In the form, it's a new definition by adding to the existing one. You give to what is already there. You're adding something. So if we look into matter as the potential, form as the actual. If we're looking at matter as to take a new definition from part of the existing old definition, the matter, the existing old, the general, you're making something new because you're making it into that potential into an actual form. You're taking the matter and you're making it something that exists. You're taking from what's already there and you're finding something within that exists. Taking the matter and you're finding the essence and you're making it exist as the essence, providing it the form to exist in reality. That's in matter and form specifics, but if you're going from induction, from the parts to the general, this also applies. From the parts, you take and you're creating a new definition from the existing parts, what already exists. You're taking what's already there and you're finding something new, the big idea, the big picture from those pre-existing parts. And this is, you're inducing, you're leading into that big picture. You bring into that big picture. Other terms you can look at, do Google searches, a posteriori and synthesis, and these are similar as well. Induction is a synthesis. And on form, we have a new definition by adding to the existing one. And that's when we already have our general concept, the existing one, we're going to add definitions. We're going to derive differentiate differences, and we're going to add new definitions from something that already exists, a general that already exists. It's different from the inductive path. So we're giving to what is already there. We already have the general concept. We're going to add differences and more things in reality that we can derive from that definition, that universal definition of form. And this is deduction, leading down. You derive, infer, and if you look into the terms a priori or analysis, it's the same things. So at the bottom, just a brief example, which I've already been talking about. A brick is always a brick. It doesn't become a house, ever. A brick is never a house. It's always a brick. Metal is metal. It never becomes a computer. Individual objects are made into bigger, more complex ones. The potential of the brick, the potential of the matter, the metal and matter, to become something more complex that cannot exist without the component forms. So without the form, the brick is a brick, and the metal is metal, or the clay is clay, and then you make it into a form, the lower level form of a brick, and then you create from those bricks higher abstracted forms such as a house. This is also how the quantum world works as well. We have composition, correlation, coordination, and correspondence, and things build up and create new things from the old, what exists. New things are created, new things emerge. From the form aspect, systems are greater than the component parts. The sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay. There are emergent properties. These are the larger constructs, the universals, that are created from more base foundational constructs from the individuals. So if anyone who's confused about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, the double slit experiment, I'm telling you, go do your homework. I spent many hours over a long period of time, probably 2 weeks of study overall, to look into the double slit experiment and how it actually works, rather than just believe what everyone else is believing. They're fed to them, they're induced into them as ideas and conceptions about reality, and people don't look into it. They don't investigate, they don't do their homework. They just gobble up ideas and fantastic beliefs that make them feel good about their position in the world and the universe. Not many people are digging into what people are saying. Is this true? How do I find out if it's true? I actually did. There was an article called Illusions of the Senses, and it's part 3 of the barriers, self-knowledge barriers articles that I wrote at the end of 2013, I think, or the beginning of 2014. That deals with how reality is constructed, in basics and how the quantum interpretations people have are flawed, because they don't go look into the experiment themselves and really dig into how reality works and is constructed. Anyways, enough on that tangent. Continue with image 11. So this is more text, and this is directly related to matter and form as I've been corresponding. Now we go from induce and deduce. I'm going to explain induction and deduction. I've also previously explained deduction and induction in the language and reality part 1 on the trivium in reality, and I've also done it on another article called Falsity and Evil, which deals with induction and deduction and other aspects, abdication and participation, other things, other dualistic conceptual frameworks for understanding reality. So induction, we add, we intuit, we cause, persuade, introduce, and instigate. In deduction, we deduct, we subtract and take away. It's an inference. Inducing is adding particulars together. The sum of parts can show the bigger picture. In deduction, we take away particulars and look only at specific ones to identify something, such as a universal attribute in that particular. So induction, we go from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the particulars, we're trying to find that X universal. It's the discovery of general from specifics. That's abstraction. A common cause from our observations. And in deduction, it's the opposite. We go from the X universal, and we're going down towards all the different particulars. It's the verification of the general in the specifics, rather than the discovery of the general in the specifics. And this is a differentiation rather than an abstraction of creating the concept. And this is facts and conclusions through a premise and a cause. And that is the universal. Back to induction. It adds relevant particulars to discover, imagine, conceive of a universal idea from them. We lead into the general from the particular. And induction and deduction, you remove irrelevant particulars to see the universal idea verified in the individual aspects themselves. You lead down instead of leading into the particular. Instead of leading into the general from the particular, now you're leading down from the general into the particular. In the quotes is the etymological roots, just like I showed in the matter and form for abstraction and derivation. Deduce is lead down and induce is lead into. And that's what it means. Lead into the general and lead down from the general. One's leading up to the higher universals, one's leading down from the higher universals to the lower particulars. Induce, we formulate a theory hypothesis from specifics. Our conclusions can be false, even if the premises are true. And in deduction, we apply a theory to the specifics. The conclusions from the universals are applied to particulars. So this is where we get our induction-deduction spiral feedback loop. We formulate a hypothesis based on premises that we presume are true, but we need to verify that hypothesis. So we start from our hypothesis. If it's true, the universals will verify it and substantiate it as we keep verifying. But if it's not true, we should eventually find a particular which doesn't apply, and then we need to revise our conception in order to make it non-contradictory in light of this new evidence. Induction, it's true for some members of the class observed. If it's true for some members of the class observed, it may not be true for all members. That's the thing in induction. You're taking some particulars and you're trying to find a universal, but you don't have all the particulars known. So it could be false. All true premises, all true particulars do not guarantee a true conclusion of a universal, because maybe you have selective grammar and selective particulars which do not allow you to arrive at a proper conclusion about reality, about universals. So in deduction, though, if you've already established that the universal is true through the process of verification, then it's true for all members of that class. If the universal is false, then the conclusion about the members may also be false. So in induction, we are adding pieces together to try to create, invent, or discover a general idea from them. In deduction, we're subtracting pieces and looking at them apart to validate and test the bigger general idea, that bigger picture. It's a conclusion from something already known. Going back to induction, it's a putting in, arrive at a conclusion from the pieces, and a deduction is a taking out, pull out a conclusion from the pieces. Induction is looking at particulars to see if any relation can be made to generate a general idea. And deduction is looking at particulars to see if they conform or deny the general idea. Individual members conform the class they belong to. Confirm the class they belong to. This is part of the species genera loop. You can keep looping and looping either into lower universals until you get to the particular, or you can go up from the particular into higher and higher abstracted universals. So again, induce, it's the potential of matter, the particular, and it's a posteriori and synthesis. Deduction is the actual form, the general, the universal, and it's a priori, and it involves analysis. Image infographic number 12. Now we're getting into being and predication. We're getting into predication. I'm going to relate it to being from infographic number 10. So we have the 10 categories of being, then we have the things that exist, so that's substance, and the non-substance, which is predicated upon those things. And there's also, anyways, we're going to get more into that. So we have the subject and the predicate. The subject and the predicate are two fundamental relations when we're talking about being, things that exist. There's two types. There's things that are said of other things, and there's things that are in other things. So there's said of a subject, and then there's in a subject. You can have something in, corresponding with said of, you could say something is the subject, so something is said of the subject, something also is the subject. It's part of it, essentially. And in the subject, this is accidental. It's not essential. Something has, it's not is, not something is something else. Something has something as part of it. Not that it is that thing. A man is an animal, but a man doesn't have the animal. A man can have light skin. A man can have dark skin. These are accidental attributes. What the set of an is essential. So to the left and right, the set of an is it's a part of the thing below it. If we're looking at it as a tree, animal to man to me, it's a part of the thing below it. The substance, the primary substance, the secondary substance is the primary substance. The secondary substance is said of the primary substance. The primary substance is the secondary substance. The accident is in the substance, and the substance has an accident. So white belongs to Socrates. It's not a part of him. Socrates isn't white. Socrates has whiteness. Quote, whiteness. It's a property of. It's not an essential aspect of. It's not an essential property. It's not an essential being, part of being. It's an accidental being. So we have what is said of any subject. This is generally a universal. And what is not said of any subject is a particular. Because if you're not said of any subject, then you can only be a subject yourself, and that's what a particular is. But if you're said of a subject, then you can be a universal substance, not just a particular substance. And that's essential predication. These deals with necessities. When you have a universal substance that's predicated off a particular substance, that's an essential predication. It's a necessity. You can also have essential predication within the class of accidents. So you'd have the genus of color and the species of white, and then you'd have this particular white. And that's all within essential predication within an accidental part of being in existence. And the essential predication is classification. This is how we classify things. And so color or animals. And then accidents is not a classification. It deals with properties and the contingencies of those properties. Something is contingent upon something else. It's dependent upon something else. It doesn't exist in itself like a substance. It's an accident. This is what is in another. It's an accident. And if it's not in another, then it's a substance. Because it's said of or is another. If it's not in another, then it is and is said of another, which means it's a substance. And it becomes either a subject itself or it's predicated of a subject, even though it's not an accident. It's a substance. So this is accidental predication dealing with possibility versus essential predication, which was dealing with necessity. And so that possibility of accidental predication is a dependence upon something else, upon that primary substance, in order to determine what the accident will be. The property is contingent upon the substance. That is not an accident. Because it's side note, I was relating this earlier in my work to matter and form, but I think I lost sight of that when I was doing my work overall. But just something to keep in mind, that just as this is divided into two parts, a duality, it can relate to matter and form, induction and deduction. Possibly, but I might just be mistaken. Right now I don't think it applies, that's why I didn't put it in my infographic, but I remember when I was reading the book and generating the visual representations of the information, I had matter and form related here. I just can't think of it right now anyways. Just something to keep in mind. Maybe they relate. There's a lot of correspondences, so maybe matter and form can be split up here with induction and deduction. I'm not sure. Just a thought. Just a thought. It's probably garbage thought, but just a thought. That's why we need logic to verify our thoughts and our conceptions, because often they're just garbage and they don't make sense. So maybe that doesn't make sense, but something to think into. Image number 13, Being and Predication, Part 2. So this is where we see the four kinds previously mentioned, where we have the pre-predicamenta, the four kinds, then we have the predicamenta, which are the 10 categories of being. And now we're getting into the pre-predicamenta, which are the four kinds. So we had particulars and universals. Now we get to create them all. We have the four kinds. So from the predication previously we had present in, and we had set of. What's in or set of. So we have set of and not set of, and we have present in and we have not present in. So right now I'm talking about the little table at the top left, at top right. When something is present in and said of, it's a universal accident. When something is not present in but is said of, well then it's a universal substance, because the substance is not present in, and the universal is what is said of. So when it's said of something, it's a universal, it belongs to it, and a substance because it's not in it, it's a part of it. So man and animal, those are parts of me, those are universal substance of each of us. Whereas white color, well, they're universals. White's a universal, it's everywhere, but it's an accident, it's accidental. So it's said of and present in, it's not a part of it. So when you have not said of, that's when you get to particulars. The said of is universal, the not said of is particular. Yeah. If you go back to infographic 12, that's what the 4 parts here. What is said of, or it's what's not said of, and then it becomes a particular. If it's said of, it's a universal. If it's in, it's an accident, and if it's not in, it's a substance. So when you take these 4 rules and you apply them, you can make a chart where it's present in, said of, present in, not said of, not present in, said of, and not present in, not said of. And these are the 4 kinds, the 4 predicamentae, which generate the 10 categories of being, or from which the 10 categories of being are based within. Because these are the overarching universal concepts from within which the 10 categories of being can be placed in. So we have universal accidents, universal substance. If we have a particular accident, well, a particular is not said of. A particular is not said of, whereas the universal is said of, because the particular is the thing itself. So the particular accident, it's not a substance, because this white doesn't ever exist in itself. It's always an accident to something that does exist. Versus a particular substance instead of a particular non-substance, which is the particular accident. The particular substance is the source thing. This is what's the most fundamental, is the particular substance. Then you have the universal substance above it, which is the particular substance is the universal substance. The universal substance is said of the particular substance. So this is Socrates, this person, this man, this horse. And the particular substance has particular accidents, which are present in the particular substance. See? The in and has go together. The particular substance has particular accidents, which is present in the particular substance. The particular substance and the universal substance, the substance goes from particular to universal, which is a said of or is relation. Particular substance is universal substance. Universal substance is said of the particular substance. So those are the 4 kinds, the pre-predicamentae. Another way to visualize it, other than in a table, is in this representation I have on the left, which is essentially the same thing. It's just said of, present in, not said of, not present in, and you have the 4 different kinds, the pre-predicamentae. And then I just added, there's 2 parts that are contrary, is said of and not said of. You can't have them both. And present in and not present in. You can't have them both. It's like one and not one. Well, it doesn't exist together. So that's how they relate. You can understand it in either way like this. These visuals will help you understand the material when you read it, because it is very confusing. That's why I did all these infographics. So this should be able to help immensely in understanding what all this stuff actually means in reference to reality. So another simple way to flowchart it is, we got universals, which are said of particular substances, and those particular substances have a relation to the non-substance of accidents, which are present in particular substances. So we'll move on to infographic 14. Now we're getting into more specifics in the essential predication and the accidental predication. Essential predication is within a category, as we previously mentioned 2 infographics about previously, and accidental predication is cross-categorization, because you're not staying within the category of a substance and what is said of it, what it belongs to, what it is. In accidental predication, you can go cross-category from the essential predication within an accident to the source substance that it belongs in, that it's present in. So again, we see the predicate-subject relation here. If you take your predicate in terms of essential predication, your predicate is going towards the subject in terms of a said of. It's essential to the subject. What is said of towards what is not said of. Because eventually when you reach the subject, well, if you're talking about the particular, it's not said of anything else. Everything else is said of the particular. So the universals are all said of particulars. So in the category of accidents, that's why I have above universal and above particular, you have on the left and right accident and substance, and on particular accident and substance. Because following the other arrows of said of and not said of, in essential predication, you must stay within your category, the category of accidents or the category of substance. So your universal accident goes down to particular accidents. Or if you have universal substance, well, that goes down to particular substance. They don't cross-categorize. You don't go from accidents to substance. In accidental predication, this can occur, which I had briefly explained previously regarding the color and how, well, the color and then the white and this white goes from accident to substance eventually, because this white belongs to a body. The body is the substance, and then the white, the particular accident of this white, has white as its higher universal, which has color as its higher universal. Anyways, that'll be in the next one, or in 2 infographics coming. It'll be explained more as a specific example. So when we go from universal to particular, we're going from universal n, that's any number of universals, where we're differentiating into the substance to the root individual substance. The same thing from accident, whatever accident n, as you go down in levels, the differentia and accident to the root source substance it exists in. So that's how you get from within accident, you're an essential predication. Then eventually when you get to substance, well, that's when it turns into accidental predication, because you're going from the accident and you're tying it back to the substance that all accidents relate to, that are based within. So the essential properties are necessity, and the accidental properties are contingent and dependent. What is said of any subject is essential to it. We go from universal secondary substance to particular primary substance, or from a universal accident to a particular accident. It's from genera to species, general to specific. The genus is said of the species. An accidental predication is what is present in any subject is accidental to it. So it's a non-substance. The property is something is a property of something else. Everything has aspects, other substances and accidents that make it what it is, different and similar to other things, which is what I was explaining in the 10 categories of being in infographic 10. That I call everything that belongs to things, even accidental or essential, they're all technically properties, characteristics, attributes, qualities, and particulars of that thing. They're a part of that thing, even if they're not essential to it. It's still a part of it existing as it exists right now. Infographic number 15. So we're going to have an example of essential predication in this infographic, and the next infographic will have accidental predication. So essential. So essential predication relates the genera, a kind, with the species, a thing, that is under it. The genera is said of the species. The genera and species are said of particulars, which is the final lower level. The universal is said of a particular, and the particular is the universal. So here I have the said of and is arrows. When you're looking at is, you're going upwards, and when you're talking about said of, you're going downwards. So the soul is said of man, man is said of Socrates. Socrates is a man, man is a soul. Animal is said of Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens sapiens is said of me, Kris, or Socrates, or anybody. And Socrates is a man, is a Homo sapien, is an animal. So that's how it goes. And here are different categorizations. And just to show, this man, Socrates, Homo sapien, sapien, Homo sapien, we belong to animal. Just like all other animals belong to animal. And you see where plants belong? Plants aren't animals. So everyone who is too stupid to understand reality and too ignorant to use their eyes to look at reality, all you need to do is learn about metaphysics and understand how this infographic I made represents reality. Animals are not plants. They are biological life. If we go up higher in the universals, yeah. And we can just keep going higher. Well, let's just go to matter. Well, then throwing a rock is just like throwing a baby against a wall, right? It's all the same. Right? Plants though, people, plants feel. Doesn't matter. You can slit throats and blood spewing everywhere. Or are we slitting the throat of a human animal, or are we slitting the throat of a non-human animal? See, because just slitting your throat, that applies to all animals. You can't slit the throat of a freaking plant. Plants are not animals. Anyways, there's hundreds of properties, characteristics, qualities, and attributes and particulars of reality that can plainly be seen through the ears, through the eyes, through the mind, and through the, quote, heart, to feel reality, to feel and recognize how animals are us, and we are animals, but we're just different kinds, and to feel and recognize that plants are not animals. Okay? It is very simple. Just like minerals are not plants and are not animals, minerals are not a biological life. Okay? So there's animals, and then there's plants. And there's different morality when it applies to animals and plants. When there's things that have their own lives and they move around the planet and they do their own things, and then you can stab them with a knife and blood comes gushing out, well, those are called animals, and we all have hearts and we all have brains. It doesn't matter. 25, 20, 15, 1 million sensational capacities that plants have. Plants are not animals. I will be getting into this in more specifics later on. I have some etymological work already done, but it's not been refined yet. I have not processed it enough. But I will be going into that in more detail, because this is absolutely ridiculous, the people who think that they're actually thinking for themselves when they regurgitate this nonsense about how, it's okay to do what we do to non-human animals, because all of a sudden plants are just like animals. All you need is the belief in your mind. Plants feel, and that belief creates an unreality that justifies and perpetuates your immoral behavior. The mind is so powerful. All you need is this bullshit belief, and it will keep you perpetuating evil into the future. That's how powerful beliefs are. They're a word magic that inculcates a belief, a conception into your mind as a mind virus, and it ingrains itself into your self-identity, worldview, and position in the universe. These can be hard things to dig out from within us. Inner work is hard stuff. Too many people are frauds and pretend that they're doing inner work, but they're not doing it. It's all superficial appearances. They don't dig deep enough. They just gobble up what people tell them, reject what they don't want to hear, and keep on living their life because they're ignorant. And they don't care for truth, morality, and other beings to the depth other people like me do. That's why they can't accept deeper understandings of morality, because they're not at the point of being capable to evolve consciousness to accept that, because they have not developed that inner capacity to care for truth and morality at that depth. If they had that deeper capacity, they would have embraced and accepted the truth rather than outright deny it. Image number 16. Accidental predication. So a non-substance, an accident that is in substance. So we have this knowledge is in this soul, me, well, in this consciousness. Anyways, I'm using the term from the book. So soul is referring to consciousness, this person's consciousness. This knowledge is in this consciousness. This consciousness is the substance. This knowledge is the accident, because my consciousness and your consciousness can have different this knowledges in it. So this knowledge is the accident. So the accidents I put into yellow. Essential predication, you'll see on the right, I have it in blue, and accident in yellow. We'll get to that after. So we have tall, accident in a body. The body doesn't need to be tall, it can be short. This color in the body. So here we have, that'll be explained on the right there, but we have an accidental going into a substance. These are all cross category, you see. All accidents into substance. These are cross categories. Versus the other infographic was all essential predication, all within the category of substance, or within the category of accident, which we see on the right in yellow. So this color in this body, color in the body, color in, or body has the color. Socrates has wisdom, or wisdom is in Socrates. So I have the arrows just like I had before for said of and is. One goes down, one goes up in relation, depending on which one you're using first in your sentence, in your proposition. The first blue bracket is about essential predication, which is within one category. So that one category is the accidents. The color, which is said of white, which is said of this white. So that is accidental predication. But if you go fully, that's essential predication within accidents, within the category of accidents themselves. Now when you tie the accidents, they always go back to a substance. So that's where this body is. And then when you go from the accident to a substance, that's cross category, so that's accidental predication. So the first three parts were essential predication, but the last two is accidental predication. So we're going from color as a class, a genus, a universal accident, to another class, which is the species of white, which is another universal accident. Then we're getting to this individual property. So not instead of the class species of white, it's this white, which is a particular accident. Then from that particular accident, we're going to tie it back to the source particular substance that it is existing in, present in. So this example shows how accidental predication comes in, and how you can have essential predication with accidents that eventually lead to the particular substance, which is an accidental predication, because you're switching categories. So it's an example of a single and cross-category predication all in one. So I'll just read the little description. Accidental predication is dependent, contingent upon individual particular primary substances they exist in. The substance has something non-essential, accidental, in it that depends on that particular individual substance. The accidental something is in the substance, but could also not be there, and the substance will still remain as it essentially is. So you only have the accidents that will change, but it will still be what it is. What is accidental is not essential. The universal non-substance, the accident, is ultimately traced back to a particular substance, even if we start with essential predication when a universal accident is said of a particular accident. It will always be dependent and contingent upon a primary substance for it to exist. And that's what the single and cross category predication shows. No matter how far you go within the essential predication of accidents themselves, you're always going to switch up to accidental predication in order to relate the accidents to a particular substance. Because the accident relating to a substance is an accidental relationship, but accidents within themselves, within their own category, are essential. Might be confusing, but go read. If you don't understand, go read it, because like I said, you'll only understand once you really delve into it. Maybe this will make perfect sense to a lot of people who've never looked into it. I'm doing my best to explain it without going into laborious detail, just covering the infographics as I made them. So infographic 17A, of which 17B will just be a visual aid to show another way to see this. So, where do I start on this one? We have the law of unity and diversity. This has to do with relativity and composition, which is what I've been talking about before, between matter and form. The matter is the potential, the form is the actual. The form informs the matter, which is informed by the form, into a specific composition, a coordination of the components into a specific relative composition. So it's a relative and specific position, coordination, and composition. That's what I just wrote underneath. Okay. So we have one field if we look at the bottom of what I did, we have the energy field, right? So that's the one field, the universal. Because if you look at this, you'll be able to see it as a V. If you put universe at the top on the left, and the energy field on the top on the right, and then the middle on the bottom, you put animal, well, you get a V shape. And this will make sense. I'll just go briefly. If you go to 17B, you'll see where animal is in the middle, where existing things are in themselves in the middle. If you look at 17B, well, this is the cosmic Ouroboros, and this is a scale representation, just like in 17A. This has to do with scale. We're not talking about the 10 categories anymore. We're talking about groupings and aggregates, and how reality is built from one part to the other. I'm not talking about substance and accident here. Okay? So 17B, the Ouroboros, you see right in the middle, that's us at the bottom, animals and all other things that exist as they exist, but not things within other things. Here we are at the bottom, and you could take the smallest part and move that over, straighten it out, and then you could take the left part, straighten it out, and then it would look like a V rather than a circle. You can look at it as a circle. in this cosmic Ouroboros. So it's things, we're in the middle of the scale of things going super small to the Max Planck into the super large of the estimated size of the universe. Okay, we're pretty much right in the middle. So going back to my infographic 17a, that's what this represents. So if we have the one field, which is a universal, which is the energy field which all things come from on one side, and from that we produce more things, more and more and more many parts. From the energy field to the subatomic particles to the atom, we're getting into more and more things. The energy field was apparently it's one thing, but it's one thing of many that ends up being created because we have the subatomic particles, which are the most parts. There's so many of those. But then we create atoms, but then the atoms have subatomic particles within them. And then the DNA, well, the DNA has atoms, and the atoms have subatomic particles. So you're getting into bigger constructed components as you go up, but each component is comprised of smaller and smaller constructed components. So the one field universal into the many parts that gets created, the particles, the particulars, and then eventually at the top they get turned into one again. The one field goes back and gets turned into one, the universe. That's what universe means, is mean turned into or combined into one. That's what it literally means, universe. So universal, we get back to the first universal, the one field, well eventually it goes back and creates the universe turned into one. So we can see how it correlates to the cosmic Ouroboros, which is in 17b, as going from the small and it creates particulars and matter, and then it goes up and those things aggregate and group, and then we get the universe. But you can see it as a circle from universal to universal, from the one field universal into the universe universal. So here we can see how universals and particulars play a part of this, because the particulars are parts and the universals are the general. So the general is the galaxy and the particulars are the particles and the atoms and all the smaller parts that make up the bigger things, which are fewer in number, because you only have one universe, the fewest. Then you have galaxies, and inside the galaxies you have more solar systems, so it exponentially increases. And then inside the solar systems you have a planet. So the universe is contingent. There's the matter and form contingent and necessary aspects of essential and accidental predication. Essential predication is necessary and accidental predication is contingent. Okay, so here we're going to relate that as well. The universe has galaxies. The galaxies are necessary for the universe. The solar system is necessary for the galaxy. A planet, I believe, is contingent for a solar system, because a solar system is solar sun. All you need is a sun to have a solar system. You don't need a planet. I didn't look into the definition, so that's why I put contingent there, because it's not required. It's not a necessity. Maybe the definition of solar system is you have to have one planet beside the sun for it to be a solar system, or else it's just solar and no system. I don't know. I didn't really care to look into it. Planet. Animals are contingent for planets. You can have planets with no animals on them. It's still a planet, right? Okay. But the rest are all necessary. For an animal to exist, you need cells. For a cell to exist, you need DNA. For most cells, apparently, red blood cells don't have DNA. So, there's exceptions to the rule. But cells require DNA in animals. Animals require cells. The animals that require cells require DNA. All animals have DNA. Wow. So you see how this is an essential predication it's turning into? Because we have animal has cell, cell has DNA, or cell in animal, or DNA in cell in animal. Sorry. I said essential predication, I mean accidental predication. Accidental predication. Overall, this is accidental predication because we have necessary and contingent applied mixed. If all we had was necessary, then we could apply the said of and is correlations. We could say the cell is set of animals, the DNA is set of cells, and the animal is a cell, the cell is DNA, DNA is an atom, etc., etc. So this isn't this I don't know what to call it. The scale of the universe. There you go. So it's a scale of groupings. After animals, you have the groupings. So that's why I have at the top here aggregate groupings in scale. Groups with members in them. Works in similar way to a genera containing a species that becomes species for the next genera and the parent child, and then the child becomes the parent for the next child, which becomes a parent for the next child. So it's all a relative loop, relative to the things above it and below it. So the groupings, the planets group into solar systems with the sun, the solar systems group into galaxies, galaxies group into the universe. So these are the groupings for scale. The other way it is a scale, and it is a grouping. Yeah, so that's the way it is. So I put in and has because it's not an actual accidental predication, but it is an accidental one when you're going upwards to the aggregate grouping because it's contingent. It's not a necessity. So I just put in there to associate. So it's not specifically accidental predication, and it's not an essential predication either, even though it looks like it because we're going into necessities. So yes, it is essential for an animal to have a cell. It's essential for a cell to have DNA, except for a red blood cell. It's essential for DNA within a cell, within an animal, to have an atom. So these are all necessities. These are all essential predications. It's just when we're looking at the scale of the universe, it's not only essential predication. It's not only accidental predication. It's a mix. And when you're looking at subject and predicate and metaphysics, there does not have to be a scale relation from one thing to the other, from a subject to a predicate. Scale does not come into the picture, whereas here I am talking specifically about scale. These are all scalar aspects of reality. Smaller parts to bigger parts. Less parts to more parts. So we have the universe, which is the one in the macro. It's the most there is. It's the biggest there is. There's one, but it's the most components because the one thing, everything is turned or combined into that one universe. It's the largest because it has the most components. All the galaxies, solar system, planets, animal cells, DNA, atoms, subatomic particles is all within that one universe. It's all in there, into that one thing. It's made of many things. So the one is made from the many. It's turned into one from many. Now conversely, if we look at the opposite side, the energy field, the universal there, instead of one macro, the one made from many, now we have the many, but it's the micro. Instead of the one, it's the macro, it's the many and the micro. And there's the least components, not the most components, the one made from many. This is the many that are made from the one, the least components, this field. So yes, in a way, it's the most components because everything else afterwards, the cells, the animals, the planets, the solar system, galaxy, the one universe, even though it's one thing, that one thing has everything in it, but everything that's in it is made of the energy field. So you see how, if we go back to 17b, the cosmic Ouroboros, it does circle back into each other. The universe goes back into the universal field because the universal field is what creates the universe, and the universe is one thing, but it's a one thing that's turned into one from the many, and the many, which is all those particles, and all those particles are what consist of that one field. So it's going from one to one, but from that one base universal of the energy field, it creates the many of everything, and then the many of everything groups back in an aggregate as we go past. After animals, then it groups into planets and stuff. But even from going from the subatomic particles, it's an aggregate grouping. The particles group into atoms, atoms group into DNAs, into cells, into animals, and on and on and on. So it's more of an aggregate grouping scale and not an essential or accidental predication. Although you can see aspects of essential and accidental predication in this scale infographic. That's not what I'm representing. So each thing is a property of another it belongs to. That's why the accidental and qualities and properties and characteristics I apply to everything in reality, whether accidental or essential, because properties exist in everything. So it's things within others. The universe has galaxies, has solar system, has planet, has animal, has cells, has DNA, etc. In essential predication, things go from universals, which are said of individuals. The universals are larger collections. They are genera to which species belong as recursive nested loops until you get to the particular individual. So you can have genera species. Species becomes your genera for the next species. That species becomes the genera for the next species. On and on and on in a recursive nested loop until you reach the primary substance, particular individual of reality. And then your recursive loop stops and you go from the universals to the particular, and that's where it stops. That's the essential predication. In the scale grouping here, we have universals like the universe and the field that has things that exist within and the things that make it up. Each child element has child elements. So the parent universe has a child galaxy, but that child galaxy has children, the solar system, which has children, the planet, which has children, animals, etc., etc. So it's just like the species genera loop. So the child elements combine into relative coordination and composition to form higher order constructs. The higher order constructs are bigger and contain more things in them. So the child of cell produces the parent of animal. So that's not the way parents and children produce, but in terms of relational terms, the children are what compose the parent. We're not talking about families here, we're talking about conceptual terms. And if you're a programmer, you'll already understand this, and if you don't, well, go look into the parent-child relationship and what it means. You'll understand more. So the higher order constructs are bigger and contain more things in them because they're built from the smaller things. In predication, the arrow goes downward when we display universals above particulars because of the said of relation. But this is a has relation as shown above. So I put in and has because the said of doesn't apply as much, and overall because we have the mixing of the necessary and contingent. So I put in and has for relationship. So that paragraph was just describing how the universals and particulars relate to the parent-child and genus-species relationship of the scale groupings that I have here. So that's 17a and 17b. The last two infographics will be a summary, and this is just to help with understanding what particulars, universals, and essences are, because when you're studying this material, it can become very confusing as to where the essence is located, because that's where we find the definition and the form and the identity. So infographic 18, I have a little visual of the tree. There's no specific labels, it's just a visual to help. So we have the parent to the child, to the child, to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You can describe it that way as well. It's parent, child, species, genera and species, and it just loops. Eventually you get to the particulars. So there's universals to universals, and that's what genera and species are. Eventually you get to the particulars, which is the individual member of that species. So the species itself, I have the arrow pointing here, is one level, and the genera is one level, and the individual member is another level. That's why I have the dashed lines in blue separating them. So the species has the essence, and the essence is where we find the definition and the form and the identity of the individual members that come into existence. Now the species has the essence, and the essence is the individual universal. So this might seem contradictory, because we have universal substances and universal universal substances and universal accidents. So you have universals and particulars, which are contrary, and then you have substances and accidents. So the universal substance and the particular substance. So in substance, the two things you have are universals and particulars, which are contrary. And substance and non-substance is contrary. So individual universal does not mean a particular universal, which would be contrary. See, underneath the little infographic, I have essence equals individual universal substantial form, not a particular universal, which cannot be. So a particular universal, you can't have that, but you can have an individual member, an individual particular that exists in reality, and you can have an individual universal, because the individual universal would be an undivided universal. That means it would be the lowest level universal, which is what I described here. The universal substantial form, which is a substance, the secondary substance that is part of the first substance, the primary substance in the particular is the universal substance of the form, of the essence. So this is a determinate universal, not further divisible into lower level universals. So like the genera can be further divisible into the species. Well, the genera is not an individual universal. It's not the universal substantial form, because the genera isn't determinate. It can be further divided into another lower level universal, which is the species. But the species is the lowest level universal. Within the species, though, you have the essence, which is the determinate universal that's not further divisible. It's not its own thing, because it can't exist apart from being a part of the individual member, but it is what makes the individual member what it is. So this is where essence comes in. I'm just describing. This is all to describe more precisely what essence is, and that's where definition, form, and identity come from, and it's within the species, not the higher universals of genera or higher up into more generic species loops, but it's the lowest level species right before the individual member particular. That's where you have the substantial form, which is an individual universal, rather than an individual particular of that member of the species. So down below we have the form of essence, form, which is the essence, which goes into matter. So you can relate this again back to form and essence and induction. This is where it relates. Where I was saying form and essence, induction and deduction relates to predication in some way, but I couldn't remember how. But this is how. Form, which related to deduction, and the essence is predicated upon matter, which is induction. So to relate that induction and deduction, you can't have deduction without induction. As powerful as deduction is in order to find truth and verify your inductive generals, if you don't induct and you don't gather grammar, well, then you can't do anything. There is no logic, because there's nothing to apply the logic to. So that's why the form, the essence, is predicated upon the matter, because the deduction is predicated upon the induction, logic is predicated upon grammar, the house is predicated upon the brick or the wood that is used to construct the house. The house does not exist without the brick or the wood. That's why it's predicated upon the brick or the wood. So that's how we're tying in matter, form, induction and deduction, grammar and logic, and we're tying it into the predication. So that should be powerful for you to understand right there. And the last one here is that's the reciprocal nature between the particulars and individuals, specifically the lowest level individual of species and the particular individual member. And this is again relating to form and matter, where you have species as the form, the definition, the identity, the essence, which needs a particular to exist in, which is the individual member. The particular individual member needs form to be. That's why it's a loop. That's why it's a grammar logic loop. That's why it's an induction deduction loop. And that's why it's a matter form loop, because the form species needs a particular matter to exist in, so it doesn't exist without the matter, but the matter particular needs a form in order to be what it is, because without the form, it wouldn't be anything except just some arbitrary matter without a shape or form. It wouldn't be something that we could identify. So they depend upon each other, just as grammar and logic depend upon each other. Because if you have grammar, and that's all you have, and you don't process anything, you're not even going to be able to recognize anything in reality. All you have is sensory input without any recognition. Logic is very important to conceive, perceive, understand, and navigate reality. So that infographic is done. This is probably one of the most important ones to tie everything in from the previous infographics, because it really lays out the essence and what it is. And I left it for the end in order to wrap everything up. And I made it at the end after I did everything else as well. And the final infographic, which is infographic 19, but image 20 in the whole set. We have universals going to particulars. So this universals are what is repeatable and predicable. And particulars are unrepeatable, and they're not predicated of anything. Things are predicated upon the particulars. So the genera and species, the genera is the general going to the species specific. And from the genera to the species, we use differentia to arrive at, and from the genera to the species to the individual, we use even more differentia, differences to arrive at it. Because that's where the most differences are in the individual things. So the individual is fully determinate and not further differentiable. Whereas universals progress in greater differentia towards the individual. When you get to the individual, you can't, well, I guess you can in cells and stuff like that, but in things that exist within themselves, cells don't exist within themselves, they exist within other organisms or within other biological life, like plants. Different type of cell than an animal cell. The individual is not fully determinate, not further differentiable. Well, that's why you can have universals. So the individual universal is not an individual particular, because when you have a fully determinate, not further differentiable universal, it's still predicable, and it can be repeated amongst many, many, many nth number of particulars. 1, 2, 3, 4 up to n infinity particulars can have that individual universal essence in it, which is repeatable, and it is predicable. Predicable for that particular substance only. So the species, the arrow goes substantial form. That's where this substantial form comes from. It comes from the species, the lowest level individual universal. That is a determinate in itself, but within the particular individual that is fully determinate. Might be confusing. That's why I say go research it yourself to understand more specifics. So the substantial form, the essence, is a second substance of the first substance, so it's a universal substance of the particular substance. So we go down from universal to the individual, from the substantial form of the essence, secondary substance, towards the first substance. That is the compound substance of matter and form. The matter which is informed by the form, and the form which informs the matter. These two are required to form a compound substance, an individual particular, a member of the species. The form comes from the species, the matter is just a general matter that exists. So the manifestation of the species comes from matter and form. The general matter that has the form applied to it in order to create the species. And I'm not talking just about animal species, or you can talk about anything. Species of, you could have, I don't know, chair. You could have specific types of chairs and Victorian chairs and all these different, I don't know. I'm just giving, it's not just animal species or plant species. Genera and species apply to universal loops, relative loops in universals that are not particulars. That's what genera and species are. It has nothing to do with biology. So the substantial form, the essence, is the secondary substance. It's the universal substance, the universal individual. It's a fully determinate universal, not further divisible into lower level universals. That's why you can have a universal individual. It's not a universal particular, because those are the contraries. But the individual, you can have a universal individual. That's why I made this infographic, to show which ones relate. That's why the arrows go to specific ones. You can have a universal individual. That's why I had them shrink towards the middle. I raised the individual up, and I raised the ones on the bottom, and I lowered the ones on the top, to show how they merge. How you're going from universal, but eventually you're going to merge with individual, because within the universal of species, you have the universal that goes with the bottom part of individuals, and the universal and individual form the form and the essence. And then when you go into higher level universals, well, it's no longer an individual, because it's only the lowest level universal that's individual. And this form is a primary definable. That's why it's part of definition. It's its own substance. It's the secondary substance of the first substance. So in this way, it's essentially predicated of itself alone, because yes, it's true that form is predicated of matter. So no, it's not predicated of itself, it's predicated of matter, but essentially as an essence in itself, as a secondary substance, it's predicated of itself because it's the lowest level universal. But for it to exist in our reality, for us to see as a compound substance, yes, it is predicated upon matter. So for the matter and form to form the compound substance. But within the class of universals themselves, and the abstraction of universals, it's predicated of itself alone, because it's the lowest level you can get within the universals. So that's why it's a universal individual within the category of universals, as opposed to the compound substance, which is a particular individual member of the species universal. That's the primary substance, the particular individual. That's the bottom part. And that is my presentation. So I will be doing a audio about the 5 other articles I did, as I think they merit an audio for people who prefer audio to reading thousands and thousands of words in 5 articles. So you can look forward to that. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. It has been long overdue. I've been working on it for months, like I said at the beginning. Finally, after 3-4 revisions, it's done. It's presented. The information is out there for other people to learn from. Please learn from it. Please develop upon it, whatever you want. The goal is to get people to understand how reality functions, how we understand reality, how language was constructed in order to represent reality. Without this understanding, you are going to be limited in your capacity to understand reality correctly. That's why all the people who believe in all the quantum quackery and all the plants feel bullshit, it's because they do not have the tools developed in order to be able to properly process and understand reality. So once you understand how reality functions and how things are grouped together, how things are predicated upon each other, then you'll actually see where animals fit into reality, where human animals fit in, where non-human animals fit in, and where plants fit in, and where minerals fit in, and where all that fits in. You can understand this without even reading Aristotle and Metaphysics. I did. I never read Aristotle, never read Metaphysics, but I understood how plants are not animals, and how minerals are not plants or not animals. Because all it takes is your mind and your eyes and the ability to identify what is in reality. You don't need any technology, none whatsoever. All you need is to develop consciousness, to be able to think properly, and to be able to use your senses and perceive what is in reality accurately. Move a degree over and change your perspective to get more data points of access in order to properly conceive of a conception and properly verify it with accurate data points. Anyways, thank you for listening. It was my pleasure to present this. I hope it's of great value to many people. Have a good day, have a good year. Seek truth, care for morality, keep learning, become morality, live it. Understanding the language we use to understand truth and morality is very, very helpful. So take care, everybody. Peace.